everyone, it's Justine and welcome to a new card tutorial for Ellen Hutson. Today I'm going to be creating 5 cards with you, and we are going to be using alcohol inks to create the color on the backgrounds. Now, for my panels here, I started off with Yupo paper. It comes in 5x7 sheets, and I cut them in half. So these are 3.5x5, and I'm using this type of paper with the alcohol ink cardstock today. I'm going to be dropping colors such as citrus, limeade, pistachio, and clover to create a background that is green. You'll see that I start off trying to fill in all of the white spaces, but then I start dropping the colors into each other. I think it's so fun to watch them pool all together to see what they look like. Now, alcohol inks are super fun in the sense that you can play a lot and the paper takes a lot of ink and abuse. I like to spread it around here by using I use a pen tube because I don't like to use disposable straws. So I just use this every time, and I just took apart a pen and used that tube. And that allows me to blow around the color and then also get it to spread and mix and mingle. I then went in and just added some more here and there to fill in some of the white areas. Whether you continue to blow and mix them together or if you like this style of background, it's completely up to you. Just keep adding colors until you're happy. Once it starts to pool up with that dark colors you're seeing there, that probably is a sign that there's a lot of ink on the paper, so I decide to blow it around a little bit more to spread it out, and that's probably the end of me adding color. So I set all of these panels off to dry. For the pink, I'm using pink sherbet, watermelon, raspberry, purple, twilight to create this background here. For yellow, I'm using dandelion, sunshine yellow, and Valencia. And I just set these all off to dry together, so no worry about having to work fast. I'm using a lot of ink on this cardstock, so it's going to stay wet for a while. I'm using indigo, sailboat, and blue pool for this really dark blue that would be perfect for an ocean background as well. Kind of wish I had kept this one just to use for a little bit of fish stamps and things like that. And then for the red, I'm using sunset orange, Valencia, crimson, and then I went in with a little bit of dandelion to brighten things up a little bit because I thought it was looking a little bit too much like blood. Then for the last one, I'm using stream, turquoise, and pistachio to create more of a teal background rather than the blue that we created earlier. So I've set them off to the side. And when you have your cardstock and you can hold it up to the light and you see almost as if, I like to compare it to if you were to leave like a sort of juice or soda on a counter or something, you know how it gets that shine to it, but it's not dry, but it's kind of sticky. That's the texture that you want to get. And then you're going to spread a piece of silver foil over top. And I like to use a bone folder, and any sticky areas are going to pick up that silver. Now, the first panels that I created obviously took a little bit less because they were quite dry at that point, but the ones that were a little more wet took quite a bit. Now, if your alcohol ink is still extremely wet at this point, it's not going to catch. It's just going to spread all over the foil, and it might not look the way you want, just like that one. That one would have been too wet. So I had to wait for this one to dry a little bit before I added the foil. So it picked it up in some areas, but overall I was able to get a much better result when I let it dry a little bit more. Now, even though you've added the foils already on some of them, you can go in and still play with them. So I added some blending solution on top of these to kind of add a little bit more interest. You can see that it repels the ink and then kind of gets it to wick away. And so that's a really fun look to grab as well. And then if you add more color on top of your panels, you're also going to dye the foil the color of the paper also. So that kind of is a fun look as well. So just keep playing until you're satisfied. You can see I've added blending solution to all of these, and it's added these really fun little areas of bubbles. And I'm now going to start getting my card actually together. So I'm using the Bohemian Garden stamp set by Julie Ebersol for Ellen Hutson, and I'm going to be using all the flowers and leaves on the set. I'm also going to be using the coordinating dies to help me cut them out a little bit quicker. So I am now going in with a embossing bag, and I'm going over top of the card panel to make sure there's no moisture in the card. I'm going to lay down all of the flowers, and I'm going to cut out the same thing on each one of the card panels, aside from the green, because the green I'm going to save mostly for the leaves, because that is, of course, the more natural color to go. So I'm just lining them up here, and I'm going to use some Versamark ink to stamp them. And then I'm going to cover them in some white embossing powder. And I'm going to set them off to the side. I'm going to do all of my heat embossing at the very end when I have everything stamped out and the embossing powder added to it. So you can see for the flowers, I did an easy technique of just turning around my cardstock so I could restamp those 3 things once again. And I can add some leaves in the middle as well to make sure that I'm not wasting any of the paper. So now I'm going ahead and adding some embossing powder on top. This is the Alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, and I'm adding it to my card panel. You'll see that there are areas where powder stuck to it that it shouldn't, and the reason why is because I had accidentally added embossing powder that was clear on top, and then I had to wipe it off with a dry brush and add white, and so it kind of just started to stick everywhere, but overall it stuck well to the stamps even though I had to remove the embossing powder and add it back on. So I am going to show you how to heat emboss. So I am going in a circular motion. I've heated up my heat gun for about a minute before I did this, and I'm constantly moving it around. I'm not putting it down onto one space at all, because what ends up happening is the paper warps super crazy, it gets really hot, and the foil also starts to bubble up as well if you've added foil to it. So I'm just doing my best to not add it for very long, and I did that in real time for this one to show you. And you can see that it's pretty significantly warped at this point, which again is why I suggest using small stamps if you're going to emboss on alcohol ink cards, or Yupo paper rather, and alcohol ink cardstock works pretty much the same way. And of course, as I mentioned, there's coordinating dies that I'm going to be cutting out using my Gemini Junior die cutting machine. Now I'm just going to go ahead and show you on the flowers how to do those ones using the different colors. So I'm just going to show you on one panel. I've picked up 6 of the flowers here, and it covers my entire card panel, so there's really no waste. Again, embossing ink cards or embossing bag over top is probably a good idea, and then I'm going to ink this up in Versamark ink and add the white embossing powder on top. So now I've added the embossing powder, I'm going to go ahead and melt all of my panels. So I just wanted to show you the way that I found to be most successful when heat embossing on Yupo paper. I'm going to show you with this panel here. Now with the green one, I showed you that I had the heat tool added to the front the whole time. Another thing to do is just go in from the back as well, and that'll help melt the embossing powder without warping your paper as much. So I found personally leaving the panel on my glass mat and heat embossing directly added too much heat, so just hold it up in the air with your hand, heat emboss the front and the back alternatively, and you should be good to go. So I ran all of these through my die cutting machine, and you see I have a nice variety of flowers, leaves, and stems here that I can work with to create various collages. So I actually went ahead and added them all to my card fronts to see how I would probably like to lay them out. So at this point, none of them are glued, but I am going to set each one of them off to the side so I can glue each one of them individually. I'm not going to show you the gluing process here because I think that would just be redundant. I just literally glued them with some Tombow Mono liquid adhesive, and if they were giving me any trouble at all, I added some tape runner to the back as well. So you can see I've now adhered them, and I'm going to go ahead on the panels where the flowers overlap the edges, and I'm just going to go in and trim them. You can also leave them if you'd like, if they're only off a little bit. That is also a beautiful design technique that you can use, but I always find them really hard to put in envelopes after. So now I've glued down all of the edges. You can see here how it's trimmed. It looks absolutely stunning as a background. And I'm going to go ahead now and just show you all of the panels that are created. So one clean and simple card with just one flower. I have some clusters in the center as well as on the bottom right, and I have a background. I'm going to be using the totally random sayings as well as the block words dies to create my various sentiments for my card. So now that everything's glued down, I'm going to add them to my Misty stamping tool because at this point I don't want to screw anything up, and I'm going to add all of my sentiments by stamping or adding die cuts. So I wanted to create a variety of occasions. I need to definitely replenish my card stash. As of recently, I gave away probably 100 cards in the last little while to colleagues and things at the end of the school year, so it's important for me to replenish my stash with a nice variety. So sending happy thoughts is my first one. I thought these flowers were really perfect for that sentiment just because they're so bright and fun. I also went and heat embossed a couple of sayings like thanks and birthday wishes. I did the exact same technique as I did with the flowers, so I didn't feel the need to stamp it in Versamark ink, color it in white embossing powder, and show you, but I did that on some black cardstock. And then I went in with one of the sayings from the Up the Happy stamp set here, and I thought this was a really beautiful sentiment as well, and just a little bit different to add to my card, and I stamped that on some white paper and cut that out in a rectangle. So I added some foam tape to some of the pieces as well to give them a little bit more dimension. So some of the sentiments as well as some of the flowers, just to add some interest. Now it's time to start attaching these onto some card bases. I'm using A2 size 110-pound Nina Solar white cardstock that measure 4¼ by 5½ when they're all folded. These are side folding cards, which means that in total they measured 8½ by 5½ when I cut them out originally. I'm going to add each one of the card bases and you're going to get a nice look here at the final results. So here are the final cards. The world is super lucky to have you with the alcohol inked background. Hello, I added here with those block letters. Thanks, a very simple card with a single flower. Big birthday wishes that uses a combination of stamp and dies, and of course the sending happy thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this card tutorial, everyone, as well as the techniques with alcohol inks, and I hope you give them a try and post them on social media so I can see them. And I will be back in September for another video for Ellen Hutson, but there's lots of alcohol ink inspiration to check out this week. Here are some suggested videos as well if you're interested in checking out some more videos and ideas.